A land that is a gateway between Europe and Asia. A land named Turkey. Here ancient civilizations grew, empires rose and fell, and still Turkey remains dominantly a land of antiquity. For animals, Turkey provides a link more vital than that with the past. A link in the chain of migration to escape the clutch of Europe's winter and, hopefully, the pressures of civilization. Rich in evocative names and places, yesterday and today are brought closer together in Turkey. Byzantium, Constantinople, and Istanbul. Three names for this great city that was once the capital of three great empires. Clinging to the slopes on either side of the Golden Horn, old and new Istanbul are joined by the bridge named after the founder of modern Turkey, Kemal Atatürk. Istanbul may no longer be the capital of an empire, but it is still a unique city straddling the east and west. Close to 20th century office blocks and shops, motorboats rock gently alongside craft which have changed little since the days of the Ottoman sultans and caliphs. The small boat fishermen make and sell their catches near the Golden Horn's two bridges. But if the fishing's poor, there's plenty of ferry work available amongst the riverside communities. For most Europeans, fish cooked as soon as caught is a rare luxury. But in Istanbul, it's common and cheap. Water fresh, the fish is served sizzling and succulent. Around the bridges, open-air traders do a roaring business. On a hot spring day, the water sellers draw the crowds. Another survival from earlier days are the human freight carriers, staggering with their loads for a few shillings a day. Traffic is constant and often confused by horse-drawn carts, almost vanished from Europe's cities, but still a common sight in the Turkish towns. Taksim Square, part of Istanbul's business section. Above the concrete and glass, the minarets and the hovels and the harbour, comes the drifting silhouette of a black kite. The Istanbul kites are unique, because this is the only city left in Europe where they breed, though 300 years ago kites were common in London. They like to feed on city refuse, and as sanitation improves, the kites move out, as they are doing in Istanbul. Not long ago there were thousands here. Now they can be counted in tens. Across this mile and a half of water, Asia and Europe literally face each other. The Bosphorus divides the two worlds. At one end, the Black Sea, at the other, the Marmara Sea. On the quayside, an entertainment reminiscent of Tudor England. This brown bear is probably from the mountains of eastern Turkey, where the animal breeds wisely far from human habitation. The Turk has no tender regard for the welfare of animals. They must serve his pleasure or his use. Otherwise, he is indifferent to them. Here, as in the East generally, it's accepted without question that man has dominion over the beasts of the earth. At present, the only way of crossing the Bosphorus is by ferryboat, a 20-minute journey. For years, commercial traffic has been building up, augmented by the increasing tourist trade, and now the ferries carry 4.5 million vehicles a year across to Asia Minor, or Anatolia as it is now known. To relieve this congestion, a suspension bridge is to be built, which will be the 4th largest in the world. Planned to carry 6 lines of traffic, the bridge will immeasurably improve communication between Europe and Asia Minor. It's bizarre to think that, at present, the only alternative to the air link between Western Europe and Asia is one of these slow boats to Anatolia. Bosphorus is navigable by vessels of all kinds. Liners, battleships, all pass through it from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea and vice versa. Weaving their way amongst the heavy traffic come large flocks of Levantine shearwaters. They travel up and down the Bosphorus between the Sea of Marmara and the Black Sea, as many as 6,000 an hour passing in one direction. The birds derive their name from their habit of skimming the surface, almost shearing off the tops of the wavelets. Out of the breeding season, the shearwaters are continually on the wing. The Turks believe them to be the lost souls of the Christians who lived in Istanbul when it was a Christian city. The typical skyscape of minarets and domes announces the shore of Asia Minor. Humans on foot, cars, lorries, buses, products and produce, merchandise and livestock, all heading east. Two naturalists from England are also heading east, here on ornithological survey work. At Lake Manyas, about 100 miles from Istanbul, there exists what is at present the only bird reserve in Turkey. Its director is a Turk, Tansu Gökpınar, and his visitors, Richard Porter and Alan Kitson, are now on their 6th visit to the Lake Manyas Reserve. Founded in 1958, the reserve is only half a mile square in extent, not a generous concession to nature conservation when you consider Turkey's total area of about 300,000 square miles. So rightly, the reserve deserves the name Kuş Cenneti, or bird paradise. But Kuş Cenneti also provides an incidental paradise for other wildlife as well. A pair of emperor moths, with only 2 or 3 brief weeks in which to display their splendid yet fragile bodies. For Tansu and his warden, Ali Kitsile, life at Lake Manyas has many rewards. Amongst them the delight of people like Richard Porter at visiting the Kuş Cenneti.
It's a magnificent reserve. I can't think of any other word to describe it. I don't know of a similar area in Europe where such a large number of birds congregate together in such a small area. And here we have 8 species of herons, spoonbills and cormorants nesting, with as many as 15 nests in a single tree. It is, of course, unusual to see spoonbills nesting in trees anywhere in the world. this must be one of the few colonies that they do so. We've never found them on any of the other lakes, and indeed even on migration they're a rare bird elsewhere in Turkey. You can perhaps see parties of 30 or 40 in some of the southern lakes on migration in spring and autumn, but apart from that they're not a common bird.
Although the help of visitors like Alan and Richard is valuable, the future of conservation lies in the hands of the residents.
Ali and Tansu are the only Turks that have a real deep-seated interest in birds, and consequently they're going to form the most important linkmen in the conservation world in Turkey. And by their efforts and the success of Lake Manyas as a whole will depend very much on how many reserves are created in the future.
Though the grey heron is safe from man in Kuşçeneti, it's in danger from the numerous hooded crows and jackdaws which take its eggs. Part of Tansu and Ali's work is trapping to control this menace to the heron colony. The night heron, as its name implies, is mainly active in the twilight of dawn and dusk, when it hunts fiercely for fish and frogs and the young from other herons' nests. It's a beautiful bird, with glowing red eyes and graceful plumes along its back. An uncommon sight. Cormorants breeding in trees near fresh water. Their usual nesting sites are crags by the sea. A pygmy cormorant, not much more than half the size of the common species. Kuşçeneti was established through the enthusiasm of a German naturalist, and at present Turkish visitors are few, perhaps because shooting and fishing are strictly prohibited here, though permitted on other parts of Lake Manyas. There's little protection of wildlife in Turkey, and it's thanks to protection in other parts of the world that species such as the squacco heron have been saved from extermination. Its plumes were plundered for ornamental use, largely as hat decorations in the 19th century. The little egret is another species that was rendered almost extinct by excessive slaughter for commercial purposes. Riding in the swaying willow tree, the little egret shows the head plumes which were sold under the name of osprey feathers. Occasionally something rare. A long-eared owl visible by day. Like all the owls, it's mainly a nocturnal bird. In the nearby branches it has 2 young, and that's probably why the adult is on view, to divert attention from its family. The name, long-eared owl, is impressionistic, not factual, as the tufts on the head are feathers and not ears. Working with the Turkish National Parks Department, Richard Porter collects information at Kuşçeneti that will help in the foundation of further bird reserves. It's hoped there'll be 2 more in the near future. With a few exceptions, birds are notable architects. But the penduline tit is one of the most accomplished of all. Out of catkins, feathers and seeds, cemented with saliva, it weaves an ovoid-shaped nest. suspended from a bough. When finally completed, the nest gives secure protection from hungry marauders, the only danger being from a rise in the lake's level which might flood the nest. Snug as a tea cosy, the nest is suspended so that its spout-like entrance and exit is away from the prevailing wind. Most of the trees at Cushioneti are willows. They need attention as well as the birds. Replanting is necessary at times because the branches of old trees break and their nests fall into the water. Birds are attracted to the reserve by the lack of disturbance, but some require even more incentive, as Richard Porter explains.
On the edge of the reserve, a very important activity took place in 1967 when Ali and Tansu cut several of the willow trees to form suitable places for pelicans to nest. They chopped the trees so that they formed platforms, and this led to pelicans arriving there in 1968 to nest. Previously, the pelicans had nested on other parts of the lake in very small numbers, but had constantly been disturbed by the toing and froing of fishermen who perhaps moored their boats next to the colonies, and so it clearly needed a management programme to provide suitable trees for them to nest in the Cushioneti. And with these trees cut, the birds returned in 1968, and 13 pairs actually laid eggs. Unfortunately, these weren't successful, but in 1969 they were, and of again 13 pairs that nested, 7 young were raised. No one is allowed to go within a quarter of a mile of these nests at any time during the breeding season, and so they do have a chance to carry on with their nesting activities completely undisturbed.
Leaving the warmth of the spring at Lake Manyas behind them, Richard and Alan set out for Ulu Dar, the legendary Mount Olympus. Here winter is still making a last stand against the increasing power of the sun. Within easy reach of Istanbul, Ulu Dar in the season is a popular skiing resort, but in the late spring few people are about to disturb the birds that Richard and Alan hope to see. Now the forlorn ski lift is pressed into service as an aid to fieldwork at 8,000 feet. The crags in their white drapes look barren of life. But there are several species of higher altitude birds to be spotted here, and added to the lists that Richard and Alan are compiling of the birds of Turkey. The wheatear, common in Turkey as in Britain, with its characteristic bobbing walk. A rock thrush, an attractive bird with a bright red breast. Black redstart. A horned or shore lark, foraging for insects. Rather surprisingly, there's a sufficient food supply for all these birds on the high frozen slopes. Certainly more at home than Richard and Alan in the cold of Ulu Dag is a typical bird of the mountains. On the steep snow walls and icy faces, a group of ravens has gathered, probing for food. However, the raven at the bottom seems to have been overindulging in something. There seems to be no explanation for this individual's curious rolling in the snow, unless the bird is simply enjoying its own brand of winter sport. ravens again, hurtling through the air like winged fragments of the dark rocks which are their home. Their strong, pointed bills make excellent tools for winkling out insects blown across the face of Ulu Dağ. Where climbers would need axe and rope, the birds feed unconcerned and remarkably sure-footed on the icy slope. With plenty of material from Ulu Dağ in their notebooks, Alan and Richard leave winter's grey and white outpost. Having descended to the visible greenness of spring, they will continue into central Anatolia to study the large bird populations that gather there in the summer and autumn. Ornithologists need to be fairly hardy characters to work in Turkey. They must live like others travelling into central Anatolia from various parts of the coast, these nomadic inhabitants of Turkey. Migratory people from the south, they travel in search of grazing grounds, staying in the warmer coastal climate in winter and moving up to mountain pasturage in summer. Flocks of sheep are grazed by other semi-nomadic tribes. Sheep and goats are milked, and the resulting yogurt is a staple food in Turkey. It's the great amount of vegetation consumed by these animals that has contributed to Turkey's considerable erosion problem. With 51 million domestic goats and sheep in Turkey, grazing is desperately short. Not only is grass destroyed, but bushes and shrubs are stripped of their bark and leaves. Water, too, is scarce, and wells are precious. Picturesque though such primitive husbandry may be, it is threatening the survival of much of Turkey's agriculture, and Turkey is predominantly an agricultural nation. As yet, there is no government control of overgrazing. The result is that thousands of acres of once fertile soil have become thousands of acres of wasteland. So grave is the problem that something has to be done to arrest the creeping desolation. And so in certain areas, the Forestry Department of Turkey is bringing dead soil back to life by planting poplars, cypresses, and fir trees. The screens of grown trees act as windbreaks, and their roots hold the soil together. Where recently there were only stones and sand, green life appears again. But reclamation will demand patience and devoted effort. For today, the landscape in great areas of Anatolia's tableland resembles the barren surface of the moon. Taking from the earth, never giving, turns topsoil into dust. tons of potential foodstuff goes whirling into the wind. The dust is swept away by water. Streams flow brown with mud as the lost inheritance of land is carried away. The loss of soil through erosion is 450 million tons a year. It's no surprise that Turkey's erosion problem is one of the biggest in the world, as the land pours into the sea.